Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Patrick McGuire. And your name is Audience. So if I refer to you as Audience, it means each and every one of you, except for that young lady right there. Anyway, as you can see, my topic has got a title. There's two key words in the title: policy and compliance. The rest of it is kind of marketing, it's kind of alliteration of words, but we're going to talk a little bit about the new state policy, SAM 5300, and we've done this on a number of occasions in much longer sessions. We got a couple coming up, I'll mention those in a while. And then we're going to talk a little bit about compliance, not necessarily the specifics having to do with what we're planning on doing, and Mary Ann Chick here from our office is kind of heading that up. I'm not going to go into the deep details of that because I just don't know them. But I am going to talk a little bit about compliance because I have experience having gone through compliance and audits in state government with audit bodies, and I think I can bring some information to you that might help. How to deal with auditors and compliance people coming in, how to pull the wool over their eyes and get a good finding, and how to characterize a particular finding in a more positive light. So we'll talk a little bit about that. They've given me about 45 minutes, and I think that'll work just right. I made some notes. I started preparing about 10 minutes ago, so I didn't get all the way through my notes. I have a script to follow. I'm known not to follow scripts, and I'm willing to go anywhere with the discussion. So if somebody raises their hand and wants to know a little bit about the federal shutdown and the continuing resolution that they're working on, we can go there too, as long as the audience, that's you, are okay with that. So, again, my name is Patrick McGuire. I used to be full-time with the state. I'm part-time now. I'm a retired annuitant working for Michelle Robinson in the California Information Security Office. And I work just a few hours a week, a month, whatever she lets me come in on, and primarily was leading a work group having to do with policy development, as well as some other areas like forensics, which I have a background in, and some other areas. So, how many people saw the BSA audit that was published having to do with high-risk areas in the state of California? There was some interesting language in there that pertains somewhat to this here. They said, and I quote, and this is what they were dealing with, was primarily the Department of Information Technology, or Department of Technology, and more specifically our office, which is regulatorily required to do oversight and develop policy. They're required to ensure general controls, which is an audit term. You'll learn more about that as time goes on. In 5300, which is SAM, which we're talking about. But our office does little to verify their compliance, meaning other state agencies, because we're responsible for all state agencies, departments, boards, commissions within the executive branch, and really kind of outside the executive branch to a certain extent. So it says we do little to verify. That has to change. In the new year, 2014, we're going to do little more compliance. Our office is an office of 7 authorized positions. I think we're down to 4. And so there's some recruitment going on. Anybody that's interested enough to come into this presentation, we probably want to hire you. So if you see something that looks good, go for it. I want to show you a quick timeline, and the reason I'm presenting this is that I wanted to show that there was a deliberate and meaningful, well thought out process that brought us to the update of the 5300. On another slide, on another presentation, very similar to this, I went back all the way to 1957. And because most of you people were not born then, I kind of collapsed it down. So basically, back in 2008, 5300 was created. It was carved out of a piece of the old 4800, which is the larger IT piece of policy. And that was because at the time the office was bouncing around, but more importantly, security was deemed an important component, so it was given, quote, its own chapter. And then over the period of 4 years, 5300 went through a ton of changes. It went through, remember when there were policy letters? Remember the old finance letters or the management memos? Those were all official communication documents that would change policy, change 5300. Often those efforts came about and were very disjointed, and they didn't consider what was already in there. And when it was published, we could stand back and go, okay, what's the best place to place that? How about right there? So the reading of the entire document was not fun. It was confusing, convoluted, and so when the OCIO and then later when the California Technology Agency, which is now the Department of Technology, established a policy steering committee for all their policy, they established a subgroup, a working group, and we had a number of good folks come to the table, work through the working group, publish the new policy through the technology letter, and it's out there. It's in good shape. We've already received some feedback. We're starting what you would call an errata type tracking of errors, so that'll all be out there very soon. And then beginning next year, sometime, somehow, some way, there'll be something called assessments that will begin. Those are still being worked out. Is it just I'm in here to do a half a day interview with the ISO assessment where we look over some artifacts? Or do we bring in an army of technicians and they sit down and they run tools on your system? Not likely, but something in between probably. Because again, the BSA said that we do very little of it. So we're going to do a little bit more of that little stuff. This is an eye chart. It's available in a larger format, but basically the decision was made early on by the working group and the steering committee that the more traditional look and feel about policies and its relationship to standards and procedures should follow this, where policy, law is above this. It's outside of the scope of this discussion, and our office, laws are passed by the legislature. But policy is the highest authority. And below that, there it works. Down here, there are standards. And standards are the more detailed what you need to do to comply with the policy. So this just articulates that. And then there's some standards, there's forms, there's procedures. All of that is there to support the policy. Keep in mind, I mentioned earlier about some opportunities coming up to get a more detailed discussion and two-way conversation, which, by the way, I'm open to any questions during or after. But on October 17th at EDD, there's a couple of sessions that are scheduled. I believe they're scheduled for a couple hours, 2.5 hours. So October 17th, EDD auditorium, morning session, afternoon session. You can go on to the sign-up sheet. If you don't have the path to get to the sign-up sheet, let me know. We'll send it to you. So there it is. That's the overall information security policy, Chapter 5300. It's out there in PDF form. It has links embedded in there. We'll talk a little bit about that. But also DGS jumped forward. I didn't expect this until quite late in the year, if not next year. DGS, I think 2 days ago, updated the online system with this. I'm finding some trouble with it already. For instance, we put in navigational capabilities, links, that when you come down to what they call the implementation controls, and we say within the policy you have to do A and B, and you're going, what does that mean and how do I do it? You got some links that will take you out to how I do that. A lot of those links go out to NIST. NIST is offline. Veterans Administration's offline. Social Security is offline. The federal government is completely offline. Even though these are just static PDFs, they took them all down. Yeah, and we have some in our archives, and believe it or not, I have them on my personal storage. I keep NIST documents, go figure. So these links, if you were to click within this document, will go to a error page saying the federal government has shut down and therefore we're not going to let you see this PDF document that was approved a year ago and hasn't changed, and get over it and go visit a federal park. And I don't think it quite says that, but gotta love government, huh? Here are some highlights within 5300. I want to get into compliance before I start talking too much anyway. We changed the format, we enhanced the format, we added navigational indicators. Many of the links will take you to California Government Code, Civil Code, the California Constitution. How many people have read the Constitution, Article 1? All right, we have somebody back there. Somebody get him out of here right now. Article 1 of the Constitution, one of the primary things that the Constitution guarantees all California residents is privacy. So you'll see that we talk a little bit more. In fact, the third one there, notice enhanced privacy directives. We the California Information Security Office, and I have to think about it because we have name changes going on all the time, we are responsible for information security and privacy within the state of California from a policy-making perspective. So those indicators will take you to those various documents, and again, the federal ones don't go anywhere. And it draws support from national standards bodies. And there's been a number of them out there. Some departments, including some that I worked with, kind of like the International Standards Organization, the ISO 27001, 27002. You know, when it really comes down to it, they're all kind of the same. How many people remember the early 80s when there was something called the Rainbow Series and there was something called the Orange Book from DOD? Guess what? That was published in '83. You could pull it out, the '83 version, and you go, if we did that, we would be in good shape. So really the basic common sense aspects of information security having to do with access control and all those, defense in depth, least privilege, all have been in place for so long. They go back to the early days of computers. Like I said, we really did enhance a lot of the privacy components in there from policy perspective. And guess what? On or about the same time, revision 4 of the NIST 800 special publication 853 did the same thing. And you'll see some of the cannibalization of NIST language incorporated into our policy. We wanted to create this very unambiguous link between our policy in the state of California and the federal standards that are generally published through the NIST publications and also in the FIPS. For those who know the acronyms, Federal Information Processing Standards is FIPS, National Institute of Standards and Technologies, that is the NIST. So we also focused more on the life cycle. It's one thing to say your system should be this, 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 and this, but if you don't build it in, if it isn't from the very beginning, if it isn't in the concept phase before you're even thinking about IT or automation, then it becomes a more costly proposition to throw it in later. So we wanted to emphasize the project life cycle. And we're working with our project management side of the house within our department to make sure that security is considered in the very early concept steps. You may have received something called stage 1, gate 1, and it's kind of the beginning of morphing the FSR process into something that's reasonable. And we were at the table, and you'll see some indication within there that security, or at least privacy, or at least identification of your data is in the early stages. Before you even think about doing an automation process, you got a business problem, you have information, you have data, maybe paper, it may be electronic, but you need to know what that data is and how it's classified. Continuous monitoring, like at the federal government, we're emphasizing a bit more on continuous monitoring. What does that mean? It really has to do with detecting anomalies, being upfront and understanding when something is a little bit different within your environment, within your business systems, that it raises some red flag and somebody takes the next step and tries to determine if it's worthy of further investigation. And this may be in a business system. I worked at FTB, and when I first started there in 2001, there were only 2 or 3 people in the information security office. Now they got like 40 people over there. And one of the programs had to do with auditing the business systems. As a result of a young lady, Darlene Sedlacek, if you don't know her, that's probably good because she kept a low profile except for when she was sending people to jail as a result of her work. But once they started really taking a serious look at the business systems and how the business process worked, once they started doing that, they were noticing fraud. People were colluding with 2 or 3 people at different levels of approval for refunds, and they were sending money out. One in particular, still in state prison, 7 of them altogether, still in state prison, got away with at least $500,000 worth of our money, the state's money, taxpayers' money, $500,000, and it was never recovered because they spent it and used it foolishly, and as crooks do. They're not very frugal. They're not putting it in a 401k. We need to work on that. So continuous monitoring is an important concept, getting notification early. Planning for the inevitable. There have been state departments that have been compromised, and the Advanced Persistent Threat, the APT, has been used by the really spooky people that come out from Washington, D.C. They say they're FBI, they say they're NSA. I don't believe them. They're just spooky people. They come out and say, this is pretty serious, this is nation state, this is, they've got the webs into your system, and I don't know if we can completely eradicate them. That happens. It hasn't happened to you, then thank goodness. It's inevitable something serious is going to come your way. And then the assessments, and I put process improvement there because it really, in my mind, and hopefully the office will continue to support this, is it's not about a gotcha. I got 5 findings, 3 of them serious. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? It's process improvement, which is, came across a couple serious ones. Let's work together before we even leave on beginning the process to get those closed down, or help us understand why you're willing to accept that level of risk. Because it's yours to accept, it's not ours to accept. And you've been accepting it, and we think you knew about this for a long time. Can you help explain how you came to that decision? So, what to look for within the policy, earlier than later, that's the concept that within the project life cycle, earlier is better. two terms that are going to be hammered home in some additional training as we move into the new year: classification and categorization. Your data is classified. It's classified by mostly law, and California law, federal law, privacy laws, etc. And your system is categorized based upon FIPS and NIST formulas that takes into consideration not only the classification of the data, but its availability of the system and the integrity of the system. And you'll hear more about that as we go into the more detailed training. But those are two important concepts that I think most of us need to get our heads around, and moving forward, if nothing else, understand our data from a classification perspective. Not say, we're FTB, we're the taxing authority, everything is confidential and is to protect it at the highest level. I don't know if we want to pay the money to do that when there are areas where that isn't necessary. And then I mentioned earlier, standards-based compliance. We're not going to leave the State Departments hanging out there saying you need to determine your audit criteria, what data elements, what are you going to be auditing, how often are you going to be looking at that, what are you going to do, and how does that interface with incident response and recovery. We're going to give you the capability to find out more about that through various standards bodies and procedures body. First and foremost is the SAM, State Administrative Manual. Kind of below that is SIM. It came about 5-6 years ago. It's the Statewide Information Management Manual. There you see forms, procedures, some standards. That's where you find all of the Office of Technology stuff on FSRs and reporting capital plans. So it's more the nuts and bolts of government having to do with IT and with information security. And there is where we will publish, and we do have a lot of work ahead of us to increase or augment the inventory of SIM documents to take some of the policy and give you that level of detail. But that's where we speak to the wider audience in California language. It doesn't make sense in some cases to take you directly from the policy and directly into some federal standard, because there needs to be some understanding what that means in California. So the SIM is that intermediate area where we say NIST says this, that means in California this, that type thing. And then of course there are certifications out there too. If you're in the business of information security, you should be involved in some way with project lifecycle, project initiation, as well as procurements. You should have some connection with your procurement people, so when that procurement comes across for a copier, like it did 4 years ago when I was at BOE, it came across as just a copier. We were just then receiving the copier type requests through the IT department, and at the time they were just ramping up these multi-function devices, and guess what? That copier, which used to sit in the corner plugged into the power outlet and that's it, is now networked. It's got a web browser in it, it's got a web server, it has FTP and telnet capability. Guess what? It's not a copier, it's a server. So you need to be there at all the procurements, not for the toner cartridge, but for the new servers, and looking to some of these standards bodies in these compliance entities like FIPS and Common Criteria and FedRAMP. Again, all of those are federal based, but why not use something from our federal partners that is well respected and free? Free to us, costs a little bit of money for the federal government, really expensive for the vendor community to go through this. So FIPS, whenever you're getting encryption, make sure it has an implementation, because just using AES encryption isn't necessarily secure. Depends on how you implement it. But you go out and look at the FIPS 140-2, they have a list of hundreds of products that have submitted and been approved. If your product choices aren't in there, I don't know that I would feel comfortable stepping outside of that inventory and purchasing something that can't attest to being FIPS 140. And in fact, you would be violating our policy. So common criteria, I don't know if most people know about that. That's a very expensive proposition too, where hardware, software, security related, submit it to common criteria, kind of quasi-federally involved, but it is a .org. And they pay anywhere from $200,000, $500,000, $600,000 to go through a testing and validation process. They have different levels called EAL, evaluation assurance level, 1 through 4 or 5, and the higher, the more rigorous the testing. Again, when I'm looking at switches or a new firewall or a new router, I'd go check common criteria. And then finally, FedRAMP, which is relatively new, has very few approved providers on their website, so it's tough to limit your selection, but that's where the cloud providers, the infrastructure as a service, the IaaS, that's where you will find Amazon, AT&T, some of the big ones, and some of the small ones have submitted, and they've been blessed that they meet certain minimum standards for the federal government, so the feds can go there. I'm feeling good that a lot better, at least when we have a proposal that goes to that same cloud provider. And there's many, many others. You probably know them through your unique interaction with technology. So we'll quickly go through here. Statewide Information Management Manual. You can see that these are all newly numbered, and the association between the SIM numbering is directly associated to its corresponding SAM section. It was, like for instance, designation letter was down here, was 70A or 70C or something like that. They just made up numbers as they went along. Now we're trying to associate it back to the specific area within SAM where it makes a requirement to follow these. So standards, procedures, and forms. And this will increase quickly over time. These two slides here just talk about a generic project life cycle, and I wanted to point out that compliance is a function of moving from each phase within a project as well. Have you done your preliminary risk assessment? Have you categorized in initiation the system? If you may not even know if you're going to be going with a system. You may not be able to categorize it, and you need to do it down here. Just know that it's important that before you move to the next phase, that you have some assurance that what needs to be done in the earlier phases has been done, so that when you move to the next, it's built into the project. And then, of course, never forget that there's a piece after it's been implemented. It's called the maintenance or the operations phase, and then ultimately it's going to have an end of life, and there's data to be considered. And we've beefed up a little bit of the new SAM having to do with media destruction, media sanitization, and it's all based upon the 853 out of NIST. So where are we going from here? I mentioned there's outreach, there's informational forum. Unfortunately, we had some pretty good training all set up for this week, Monday and Tuesday and Friday, where we had a NIST person coming out, and she was just going to spend all of her time training and talking about NIST. That got canceled. So it is what it is. We hope to get her out again once things are rolling. We are expanding the offerings within SIM. Couple of candidates will be, like for instance, 5315 says that you need a security test plan to test for security. We're going to give you some of the details, drawing from many sources on what that means for California, And then again, we're going to expand a little bit on the media disposal. Self-reporting, 5330B, that's the old 70A. It was called, or it was one of the numbers. It was called a risk management and privacy compliance form. Form hasn't changed. It basically says, I, the director of this agency, department, commission, etc., do hereby swear that we are in compliance with this, not this, and signs, and where it's, not here, we recognize we need to be in compliance with that. We're deficient, sorry, we are moving to compliance. It's going to take a little while, 6 months, 6 years, or never, but we got a plan. We got a plan, and here it is for you to see. That has been done every January 31st of every year, going back many years. We normally would look at it, check the signature, because I think we require a wet signature, make sure it's at least the department head, if not their official designee, which we also have another form, gotta love forms, and we also look through their deficiencies. They say everything's great. Basically file it away. That department is perfect, very good, in the file folder, but that's not good enough. And because it just isn't good enough. There must be something that we can help with. And so beginning in the new year, there's going to be a more formal process. What that is, we're not sure. Is it strictly taking the self-reporting audit and making a phone call saying, you say you have an incident response capability within your department, but we've been noticing that something wrong with it because you're never on time on reporting your incidents and closing them, or reporting them within 10 days and then closing them out in a reasonable amount of time. So we don't feel like you're really there. Let's have a conversation. Maybe that's all it is. Or maybe it is taking that out and saying, I'd like to see artifacts. I'm here for 4 hours. We'd like to see artifacts that can attest or prove each one of these declarations that you are. You have a good policy, we'd like to see it. You have a risk management program and you did a risk management every 2 years and the director has signed off on that. We'd like to see that. Was that by hiring out a third party? Did you do it internally, etc.? Maybe that's it. Or maybe we're going to send a tool out to the departments and have them do a more detailed self-audit. Still self-reporting, but in a much more detailed, step-by-step, maybe as many as 200 items at a detailed level, down to the 853 level, maybe that. Or maybe we have that army come in and provide you a full week, formal, rigorous audit. I don't know. Don't count on that last one. So where's the value in doing these kind of compliance audits or assessments? And I'll use the audit assessment interchangeably for purposes of this presentation, but they really are quite different. First of all, you may not have a choice. When I worked at BOE, FTB, IRS would come out every 3 years, safeguard review. They would bring out a team. They would do an intake they would travel Monday and Friday and generally spend 3 days looking over printouts, interviewing people, and even wanting to run tools where they plug this into your system and it has a capability of spreading system-wide and interrogating all the nodes on the network. We never let them do that. On a couple of occasions, we would run a similar tool of our choosing and provide them the basic same information. But to have somebody even, or especially the feds, come out and run some tool you're not real familiar with on your network is not a wise thing to do. Let's find some value in this process. Let's get something out of this besides a day or 3 days of headache. Keep in mind that compliance is point in time. It is at that point in time on that particular item, that's all it is. It doesn't say anything about what went before or what's going on the day after you leave. And keep in mind that full compliance, anybody know what the bang or exclamation point equal is? Yeah, that's right. Somebody's a Unix shell scripter here. Full compliance does not equal full security. You can look great on paper and be in the toilet on your security. Vice versa, you can really look sharp on your security and looking really good, and anybody with half a wit would say you're doing really good security work, and you may fail some things on compliance. So some of the audit requirements that they require are somewhat nebulous, and you can vary from them. We'll talk about that in a couple slides. How am I doing? What time is this over? 10 minutes. Thank you. Okay. And I gave you some examples. That was what that bullet's there for, to remind me to give some of the personal examples. Audiences like examples, right? Right, audience? Very good. So, risk acceptance. Can we accept an out-of-compliance condition? Michelle doesn't know that I'm talking about this here. And Mary Ann and Donna, yeah, very good. We have an understanding. This has always been, and I've had some conversations and philosophical conversations with Michelle and many other people, Mark Weatherford and other people before them, and late at night with myself, after having a couple margaritas, I go into this conversation about can I accept an out-of-compliance condition? So let's say I do not have an intrusion protection system, and I should, for whatever reason, says I have to have an intrusion protection system that will stop any attacks in their tracks. And I can't afford it. I'm a little lowly department. Everything I send over to finance, they reject. I don't have the expertise. My network people and server people is that one guy that used to be in the business side of the house, but he's really good on computers, so he's doing the work. So I don't have the wherefore-all resources, money to do that. Can I accept that? And as a department head, according to policy and government code, yeah, it's on my back. I accept the risk. That is what what they call the FSMA, which is a state regulation, not the federal FSMA, but the state regulation basically says that it's up to the various department heads, agency heads or department heads, to do a risk assessment and based upon their risk tolerance, accept or remediate or mitigate in some way that risk. It kind of depends. The answer to the question, can I accept it? It kind of depends. PCI people, the credit card people, they're not real flexible. They're bean counters, and they say you must encrypt this traffic. Well, wait a minute. It's in my internal network. It doesn't leave my internal network, and they say, well, let me check the regs. No, it says do it, so you do it. They're pretty strict. IRS, somewhat, depending on the team that came out. Usually by Wednesday, they're getting tired reading all that stuff. They're open to maybe a little dinner, a little, have it over there, a few cocktails. Maybe there's ways of working the system, and they're not as stringent, and they're open to discussion as reasonable human beings, IRS, reasonable human beings. But these are techies, and we all know techies are really people persons. Huh? So anyway, they're open to a really good discussion about, you're really hitting right below compliance. You're not quite there, but you got these things called compensating controls. We'll talk a little bit about that. And, we're feeling okay. we're not going to put that in the report as a finding. Good job, have another drink. The assessment coming out of our office, California Information Security Office, you could pull the wool over our eyes real well, especially if you're willing to, take us to dinner. So, yes?
Question about that. Disk encryption was mandated, 4 or 5 years ago? Where would that fall in this?
Yeah, very good. Very good question. You okay? Okay. And that was changed recently to include server tapes, server and mainframe tapes. But yes, all portable media, laptops, CDs, DVDs, thumb drives, all had to have encryption on them if it contained personal, sensitive, confidential, or notice triggering information, I think the language says. And a lot of departments chose not to do all their systems because it was costly. They thought it was costly. And so they would say, no, that one is a loaner. It only goes out for presentations to various places. Many departments said, we really don't know. That's splitting hairs, because at some point in time, somebody's going to say, can I check it out to do some work at home on my audit compliance? And moving along. So the state, in my experience, every system, and including at BOE, we even went to the extent of desktops, especially in the field offices where there were a lot of broken windows and desktops stolen, because it was, I don't have to report loss of information to the whole world that we lost all that information. So if it was encrypted, it was kind of get out of jail. So there are a number of departments that currently do not encrypt all of their portable devices and storage media, and we have done little to nothing to force them or call them out, and they are willing to accept that risk. I guess I'd have to take a look at each individual case and determine whether or not that's a reasonable decision to accept that risk. Negotiate and document decisions. Be sure to negotiate. Don't be passive when auditors or Marianne comes in. Don't be passive. Negotiate this stuff. And then go back and revisit regularly anything that was out of compliance. And compensating controls. You will see within the policy that it says in a number of occasions that you have to do this unless you have done a risk assessment, determined for whatever reason I can't or I don't want to, or it's just too hard, and I'm going to use compensating controls. What is compensating controls? Well, PCI says it meets the intent and rigor of the original stated requirement. Well, that probably, I'll do the original one. It's just as expensive. But NIST, which we're a NIST house, we live and breathe, they have something called management, operational, or technical. So you have a technical problem, you can come up with a administrative or management solution that provides equivalent. What's equivalent to encryption in the case of the laptops? Not much. Or comparable protection. Comparable, in the ballpark maybe. So use the compensating controls. I don't have the money to do encrypting all of my portable media. So any of the CDs that we send to the 58 counties, we're going to send by registered mail. Is that compensating instead of just regular mail? Is that compensating? Probably not. Maybe they're not going to use encryption, but they're going to use some encoding scheme that costs no money. No software required, just do a 3-bit shift. And there's tools, open source tools. Shift it 3-way encoding. And it's really not that big a deal. It's just addresses for properties for tax rolls. That might be more than acceptable to the director. And if I was the auditor, I would say, yeah, that makes sense based upon the sensitivity of the data and your compensating controls. And NIST goes on to say that you may need to have more than one, two, or more compensating controls to kind of bring it up to that level. And it doesn't have to be an existing security control. You can make something up. And I'm not being frivolous with that, because as long as you meet the test of comparable, if you make up something new, we're going to, we're going to label all of the tapes, because right now we require any mainframe or server tapes must be encrypted. We're going to label the ones that we keep in our library that never leaves the facility. We're going to label them sensitive information, don't take outside. We're going to add an extra lock on the door where it's stored, and we're going to start some type of log so that we know who comes and goes. So, rules of engagement. Negotiate the scope of work in advance. So before anybody comes in, make sure that you understand the full scope of work. Is it going to be strictly interview with asking for artifacts, or is it going to be an active? Are they going to come in with tools? Are you going to consider them? Are they going to leave the tools behind? Request, you got findings, you got deficiencies, bring recommendations to the table with it. Otherwise, get out of my office. Require intake briefing, have the director there. Have the director there. Yeah. But I may be the one coming out too. If I'm around, well, I'll change my tune then. You don't want Michelle on your back. Anyway, require an intake executive briefing. Try to get the director in there so that she hears. Assign an internal resource to work the auditor or work with the auditor. Either way you want to go, work them. And review and comment on interim findings. Ask for findings as time goes on. Comment them, negotiate, come up with compensating controls, resolve them before they even leave, if possible. Provide a formal response to the findings ultimately, so when they give you the formal report, say, I want something in writing that we responded, and then you want your exit briefing with no surprises. So the auditors come in, they say to the director, we had this, this, and this. Director should not say, Patrick, what's this all about? No surprises. And for further information, Mary Ann Chick. That's our office and our main number, our email, etc. So